Welcome to Passing the Plate, the podcast that's all about food, traditions, and the incredible connections they create. I'm Ashley Covelli, the food writer and recipe developer behind Big Flavors from a Tiny Kitchen.
And I'm Lisa Lisson, the genealogist and family history expert behind Are You My Cousin? We are your guides on this flavor-packed adventure. We're not just talking about recipes. We're diving into family history, exploring new cultures, and preserving favorite recipes for future generations. In short, we're celebrating the stories and tastes that come with every bite.
So grab a seat at the table and let's head out on a journey of flavor, tradition, and connection. This is Passing the Plate, where every episode is a feast for the senses and a celebration of togetherness.
We're getting a little nutty in this episode to explore some of the delicious varieties of nuts that have been making appearances on family tables and in backyards for centuries.
Lisa, I love this because I never thought really about backyards being the place where you could get different types of nuts until kind of we started recording this because some of your stories. For me, it was my earliest memories of that were like my grandparents having the big bowl of mixed nuts on their table with all the little nut cracking tools and picks, because I loved picking out the different things, because a lot of them don't look anything like what they look on the inside when you have the whole shell and everything.
Ashley, I know what you're saying about those nut cracking tools because I love those. My grandparents had those as well. Primarily, we were cracking pecans at their house. We would love those little tools. It was like such a thing to be able to crack the nut, and if you could get it out whole.
Oh, yeah.
Which, didn't happen that often, right?
Right.
But then you got to get at the same time, I didn't want it to because then I wanted to use the little pick things.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like being a surgeon. Like getting in there with all the little tools. So I actually looked up the definition of nut because you know how like sometimes things that you consider one food are actually another, like tomatoes and peppers are really fruits, not vegetables, even though they're usually used kind of vegetable-like. So the Oxford Dictionary says that a nut is a fruit consisting of a hard, tough shell around an edible kernel, which then led me to look up what is an actual kernel by definition, and that is a softer, usually edible part of a nut, seed, or fruit stone contained within its hard shell. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get to some specifics. Lisa, I know you've talked about pecans a lot in the past since your family had pecan trees. Did you have other types of nuts growing at home or at your grandparents' house?
I'm trying to think. So the nuts, actually, we didn't actually have them in our yard. They were in my grandparents' yard. So mostly it was just the pecan trees. And I do say pecan and not pecan, although either one is perfectly fine in here. But I do say pecan. And so they do take quite a bit of looking after. And I remember growing up as a kid, neighbors would pay the neighborhood kids to come pick up the pecans because there would be so many of them. And so, of course, we got to keep a lot of them, which my mother absolutely loved. But the big thing that we would do is that after Thanksgiving, we always had Thanksgiving at my father's parents' house, and they had pecan trees. So we'd eat the big Thanksgiving meal, and then we'd go out and we'd pick up the pecans because that's about the time of year they were really dropping to the ground. And so we would go pick up, that was what we did. We'd go pick up pecans and shell pecans. But my dad would tell a story about black walnuts, which are actually not as common as you would think to find. So I don't know if you've ever seen a black walnut tree.
I don't know.
But they have pointy things on them.
Oh,
they're harsh trees. And
so maybe I have seen them and I've just avoided because they look a little foreboding.
Yeah. So, but my dad would talk about, I had this family photograph, it's not even a family photograph. There was a chicken in it. It was a picture of the house where he grew up where he was born and little. And they lived on a farm. And he goes, but I remember this tree. And it was this kind of tree half off the side over there in the picture. And he said it was a black walnut tree and that the black walnuts would drop to the ground. These things were big. I mean, these, not as big as a baseball, but they were big and they were hard. And then he said the kids would gather them up. They'd have to stay on the ground until they dried out somewhat. And then kids would gather them up, get the husk off of them, and they would store them in the old corn crib in the barn. And then so when their mother or grandmother, whoever was baking, needed some walnuts for the cake or for whatever, they would go send the kids out, give them, and they had to crack the nuts to get the black walnut out, and they had to use a hammer. And of course, that is every little boy's dream.
Oh, yeah.
Just to crack a nut with a hammer.
Like
and so
wood
that's
shop
what
class.
Yeah, exactly. So you talked to, it was just so much, he said they were just like, yeah, that was great. Because it was kind of like having their own little, baking store out the back. But getting to crack the black walnuts with a hammer. I've not had that opportunity to do that, though it still sounds kind of fun.
I mean, you still could. That reminds me of the story my mom had told about hickory nuts, and just like the mental image I get hearing stories about kids cracking these nuts with hammers and shoes and all this stuff. It's just, it's too good. So I don't have much experience with black walnuts. I'm not even sure that I've had one. Do you know anything about like the difference between them and a I don't know, standard walnut?
Yeah, so there is a difference. I actually did do a little bit of research on the internet for this. And accordingly, the black walnuts, they are different than what's the English walnut, considered the English walnut. So it's the English walnut that we typically see more commonly in the grocery store. If it doesn't say it's a black walnut, it's not typically. Black walnuts are a nutritionally dense nut, and they actually contain the highest protein content of any tree nut.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that. I thought that was really interesting. And they have a very rich, very bold, and distinctive flavor, whereas I think the English walnuts tend to have a little bit milder flavor.
Interesting.
And that's sort of how my dad described it to me as well.
Do they still look like little brains? That's what walnuts look like, little brains to me.
I think so. Yeah, I do think so. Yeah, but kind of similar.
So this kind of makes me wonder, like, there's a lot of nuts that grow on trees, but also peanuts grow underground, which is, peanuts has got to be one of the most commonly used nuts. And I learned a ton about how they grow back a couple years ago when I went to Georgia with the Georgia Peanut Commission to do a peanut harvest farm tour. And it was the amount of effort that goes into growing and harvesting those, unlike the walnuts like you were talking, where I guess when they fall off the tree, they're ready.
Yep.
These, like, they had so much work that went into it, and after they dig them up, they have to lay them in the field for, I can't remember offhand, I want to say like 72 hours or something, for them to kind of like dry in the sun before they can actually process them. So you'll see the peanuts growing, and then for a couple days, you'll just see them all like laying out in their bunches all over the fields. And so they have to like time it just right, because if there's rain, they're not going to dry in the sun. It's like a whole process, but it's really interesting. And it was really cool too. They store them in these giant silos. So we got to like walk into it was like mountains of peanuts. It was really cool to see.
That must be amazing.
Yeah.
To see that many. I love peanuts.
And the machines that like sort them by size and everything. It was really, really interesting.
We hope you enjoy listening to Passing the Plate, and we'd love it if you added a pinch of spice to our recipe by leaving us a review. It lets others know what they're in for and helps us keep serving up these delicious, heartwarming stories.
So after you devour the latest episode, pop open your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. We appreciate your support and can't wait to share more delicious adventures with you on Passing the Plate.
So do you have any favorite peanut recipes?
Absolutely. Aside from, I sprinkle them on like parfaits a lot, just the roasted unsalted ones. I like to keep those in the pantry because I make homemade peanut butter, and that I use unsalted peanuts, roasted unsalted peanuts, because if you use salted ones, it could get pretty salty, and you can add your own salt to your liking, but if you use already salted nuts, it'll be a lot. And like one of my first food memories was making fried peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with my grandpa. So it's like a grilled cheese, but peanut butter and jelly, you just like butter the outsides of the bread and you griddle, cook it on a pan till it gets nice and golden. And so it's like crispy and warm, and that one's really good. Yeah.
I've eaten a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in my day.
Yeah.
And I actually still,
Yeah.
I'll still like when I'm on a road trip, I'm like, well, I'll just take a sandwich. It travels really easily.
Oh, yeah.
But I have never actually fried one. I never thought about frying one.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. It's just a different experience because you get that crispy bread and then it like warms the peanut butter just enough. I don't know. It's a different experience for sure. And he would cut them in the triangles, like diagonal for me. I did some for my son when he was little, and I cut them into kind of like sticks, like kind of like planks, and then I put like some jelly on the side to dip. There's also like big controversy over which way you build your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Do you do peanut butter on both sides, jelly in the middle so that it doesn't get soggy? Do you do one on each side?
I never thought about that.
Creamy versus chunky. I mean, people have opinions.
Wow. Now I do like either smooth, or chunky. I don't have. It's not like I like one better than the other. I like them both. I typically just put peanut butter on one side, jelly on the other. But I'm usually just eating it fairly quickly too.
Yeah.
So
I used to do it that way, and then my husband was very big on like if you're making this ahead of time and you do that, it gets soggy, and then like the ratio of peanut butter to jelly is off or whatever. So if you put peanut butter on both sides, it's a moisture barrier, so then the jelly won't make it all soggy, which is good. But did you know, I learned this in Georgia also, chunky peanut butter isn't just peanut butter that wasn't processed as smoothly. It's creamy peanut butter that they add in chopped nuts. I don't know why that surprised me. I thought it was just like when they're however they blend it up to make it creamy, they just like stopped earlier for the crunchy, but they actually fully blend and then they add in chopped peanuts.
I would never have thought of that.
Yeah, right? But it makes sense because it's an even consistency of chunks. It's not like, yeah.
Well, that's what I was just thinking is that when I think about it, you're right. It does make sense because it's each of the little bits of peanut is, you're right. It's fairly uniform. And I don't think you could get that if it was just you're processing and you stop part way. Yeah.
It's like those little things that you don't think of, like something that seems super straightforward. It's like, actually, they do it a totally different way than you thought. So one of the recipes that I made inspired by a milkshake that I had in Georgia after one of the farms that we had checked out, it was a peanut butter milkshake, and it had bacon and I want to say banana. Yeah, it was a peanut butter milkshake with bacon. And so I did a version of that at home, and I made a peanut butter whipped cream because somebody was telling me that there was a chef who put that peanut butter powder in with whipped cream when he made it to give it kind of like a more interesting flavor. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So I did frozen bananas. So it's not an ice cream based milkshake. I'm not saying it's healthy. There's still bacon on top of it, but it's not, it's not scoops of vanilla ice cream. It's just frozen bananas that gives you that nice creamy, smooth texture. And then I have the option to make it boozy, a little shot of bourbon or even peanut butter whiskey, if you wanted to really peanut butter.
Peanut butter whiskey? I've never heard of that.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple brands. One is Screwball. It's got like a little sheep on the logo, and the other, I'm blanking on. There's like two main brands of it because it was really popular a few years ago. So yeah, you can put a little of that in there. That's also great in hot cocoa if you wanted to like spike your hot cocoa. But then I do a little like crispy bacon on top, and then for the like regular milkshake, I do a maraschino cherry, and for the like fancy happy hour one, I put one of the like fancier little cherries in it. That's it's a fun recipe. It's very different.
It sounds delicious. And I like how it is very flexible. And again, which has been kind of a theme with some of our episodes lately, is I'm learning to be more flexible based on some of the options you've given, based on the inspiration I get from you with that. So I love this idea of that peanut butter milkshake, but using it's banana as your base.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I mean, the texture you get from that is so great. Like there was a whole thing, people were calling it nice cream years ago, where you would just like freeze a banana and blend it. And we used to like kind of make a sauce with peanut butter to put on top of that. So yeah, it is really flexible. And I do also have a peanut recipe roundup on my website with just like a bunch of recipes that incorporate peanuts. It's super versatile, I feel like. And I feel like it's a great kind of chopped up crunchy topping to go on things too.
Yeah, that sounds delicious.
Yeah,
definitely.
You can find the show notes and links to recipes for this episode at passingtheplate.org/40.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Passing the Plate. We hope you enjoyed our journey into the world of food, traditions, and the amazing connections they create.
As always, it's been a pleasure sharing these delicious stories with you. Remember, food is more than just sustenance. It's a way to connect the dots between our past, present, and future.
And until next time, happy eating, happy connecting, and pass the plate. Head to passingtheplate.org/podcast for show notes.